Presidential candidate John Kennedy wants your vote in the Democratic primary. Here's why he feels this primary is so important.
I will be chosen. I'm running in 6 or 7 primaries in an attempt to demonstrate that, at least my views, and to express the hope that other candidates will run. I think what would be the greatest mistake would be for the Democrats to try to select a candidate who had not been willing to run in various primaries across the country in the spring. If he can't win a primary today in this state and other states, he can't beat Mr. Nixon in November.
And speaking further about the probable opponent in November, Kennedy expressed these ideas on how he will try to win the national election.
I would say it would be to run on the 2 ways. First, to attempt to demonstrate that this administration has not met its responsibilities either at home or abroad. That if Mr. Nixon is a leading part of this administration, which is one of his claims to the presidency, then he is involved in those policies. If he has not been a part of the administration and he has not agreed with the policies domestically on the farm, in the cities, in relation to our schools, in our national, in our defense policies and our policies towards the underdeveloped world, then that should be stated.
What kind of a man will your vote help to elect? What does Kennedy stand for? What does he hope to do? What does he intend to change?
There are 17 million Americans who live on a substandard diet. There are 15 million American homes which, according to the last Bureau of Census, are substandard. 5 million homes in our cities which without plumbing. Anyone who says that this isn't the greatest possible time for vigorous and progressive action do not know what they look at, because this country is the defender of freedom in the United States and around the world. It's no accident that Mr. Khrushchev comes here, because he knows that we are his great adversary. That if the United States fails, if we collapse, if we do not move forward, the cause of freedom all over the world is lost. We have the great historic role, not granted to anyone since the time of Athens, 2,000 years ago, to defend freedom. And therefore, I think it's incumbent upon us to have a vigorous and progressive and vital Democratic administration in 1960 to take the leadership of this country. And I want to be sure that we haven't lost something important in this country, that we haven't gone soft, that we don't have so many cars and ice boxes and television sets, that we just look to our own private interest and not the welfare of the country. We who sit here today are the beneficiaries of millions of Americans who have fought and died and lived for this country to make it what it is. I will describe to you only one of them. A young American who was taken prisoner in the Korean War was brought out in front of his comrades, and he was asked by his Chinese captors what he thought of General George C. Marshall. General George C. Marshall, he said, is a great American. Immediately he was hit by the butt of a rifle and knocked to the ground. And he picked himself up, and they asked him the same question. What do you think of George C. Marshall? He said, I think General George C. Marshall is a great American. This time there was no rifle butt. They had classified him and found that he had courage. And the question is, where are all of us as Americans and as a nation going to be when we are asked to step out and say what we stand for? This, therefore, represents a great opportunity and a great responsibility for all of us who are Americans, who are Democrats, who wish to serve our country during the times that lie ahead. When the American Constitutional Convention met, at the back of General Washington's chair, there was a picture of a sun low on the horizon. And all during the consideration of whether the delegates would reach agreement on the Constitution, the delegates discussed whether that was a rising or a setting sun. And at the conclusion of the meeting, after the delegates had agreed to the American Constitution, Benjamin Franklin stood up, and he said, all of us wondered whether that was a sinking sun or a rising sun. Now we know. It is a rising sun. This is the beginning of a great new day. I am confident that the next few months and years can be a great rebirth and revitalization, that we are at the birth of a great new day in the history of this country and in the history of the Democratic Party. Thank you.
Senator Kennedy can be our next president. It's up to you. Vote Kennedy May 3rd.
This is Senator John Kennedy, the man who can, with your help, be our next president. His great strength is his very real knowledge of your problems. Listen as he discusses labor legislation.
I'm hopeful we're at least going to get a chance to go on record on unemployment compensation, and I'm hopeful that we are on minimum wage, because I think that both of these are bills and parts of programs which were started in the 30s and were not brought up to date in the 50s. And the responsibility of us in Congress, with the great beginning that was made on social legislation in the 30s, is to make sure that it's kept up to date, and to decide that merely because you did something in 1935 or 36 or 37 that did the job. Nearly every program, Social Security, minimum wage, unemployment compensation, all have to be improved every 2 or 3 years to bring in new people and to increase it according to the increase in the cost of living.
Senator Kennedy has gone to you, the people, to know your problems, to answer your questions as to his record and his beliefs. Listen as he answers this farmer's question.
The farmer's income has dropped nearly 15% in the last 12 months, and his cost of doing business has gone up about 10%, the same thing you have with your feed. That gives him a total loss in his position of almost 25%. Now, if this continues, it's going to affect our entire economy. I would say that the first and most important task, really domestically, on the desk of the next president will be an attempt to arrest the decline.
And he has strong convictions on what the role of the president must be in the difficult years ahead.
They demand that he be the head of a responsible political party, not a man who is above his party. A man who will formulate and fight for legislative policies, not be a casual bystander of the legislative process. Today, a restricted concept of the presidency is not enough. For beneath today's surface gloss, as we see the Eisenhower administration coming to an end, beneath the gloss which distinguishes that administration, we see that there are increasingly dangerous and unsolved problems which will disturb the next president of the United States from January 1961 till the end of his term.
Here is a man whose course is action. Action now in behalf of those who can't wait. And among those who surely can't wait are our older citizens who are unable to withstand the financial strain of medical care. Listen as Senator Kennedy discusses their problem with this aged couple.
I think that the best plan to do would be, through the Social Security system, receive assistance in the payment of your medical bills, hospitalization, all the examinations, and all the rest. Well, I think that this Congress ought to do it. I don't think we ought to wait to another administration. I think it ought to be done this year. And I must say, as Vice Chairman of the Committee on Aging of the Senate, I don't think that there's a problem that's more serious for the 14, 15 million people who are over 65, many of them with their incomes down and with their health gone, who face an overwhelming problem in paying for their bills.
He listens, he speaks. His record is one of action. This man can win in November with the active help of Indiana Democrats on May 3rd. Your vote in the Democratic primary will be one of the strongest indications the Democratic Party could want to guide the nomination of this winning candidate.
This is Senator John Kennedy. I'm a candidate in the Democratic primary in the state of Indiana on Tuesday, May 3rd. I ask your support in that primary. I'm running in Indiana and in 6 other primaries stretching across the United States because I think the people themselves should have an opportunity to participate in the selection of the Democratic nominee at Los Angeles. The primary in Indiana gives us such an opportunity. I run for the presidency after 14 years in the Congress because I think the office of the presidency is key. In that office, a vigorous executive can take action to protect American agriculture, to advance the economic interests of our country, to protect the peace and the national security, and to move ahead. I ask your support, therefore, in the primary on Tuesday, May 3rd. I think that if we can be successful here, we can move on to Los Angeles and in the nation in November.
Your vote is your agreement with what John Kennedy stands for. Indiana Democrats, it's up to you. A candidate is elected one vote at a time. Your vote will decide May 3rd. Vote Kennedy.
following film is sponsored by the National Citizens for Eisenhower-Nixon.
This year, there are 54 million women eligible to vote. 2.5 million more women than men. Enough to decide the whole election. And as November 6th draws near, you women are doing a lot of thinking about a lot of important things. For instance, you're thinking about the cost of living. You want to see living expenses stay at a reasonable level. You want your family budget to be protected against inflation. You're thinking about your family. You want to be as sure as you can that you will all go on living together in our present happiness and prosperity, in an America at peace. You're thinking about your children's future. You want them to grow up under the best possible conditions in terms of schools, health, and general welfare. And because they believe he represents their best hope of achieving these things, the women of America are making their choice for president, Dwight D. Eisenhower. But suppose we ask some of them what they think about the coming election.
My main reason for voting for Eisenhower is because I believe in his sincerity. I don't feel that he is furthering his own interests, but he is furthering the interests of the country and the people.
I feel he's a very big man, which is needed for that position, and also because he has not been and is not what I consider a politician.
I'm interested in Ike, and this is my one big reason why I'm interested in Ike. As a woman and future homemaker and mother in America, the type of man that I want to be president is a man that I and my family and my children and those around me can look up to and respect. I think that President Eisenhower is that sort of man.
Inflation. We're not going to have that in the next 4 years if we vote right with Ike.
I'm voting for Ike because I feel that he is a God-fearing man, and I think that's essential in any leader, especially the leader of our country. I think that Eisenhower has shown how he feels about the average working man. He's given us the minimum wage law, the changes he's made in Social Security, and I think in another 4 years he'll do even more than that for us.
I'm going to vote for President Eisenhower because he represents the things in which I believe. I like his philosophy of the dignity of man, and I also believe that he's a sincere, honest, and high-caliber person.
He has a smile that could prove only one thing, and that is honesty.
So much of our future rests with the women of our country. They're the homemakers. The whole family unit revolves around them. Everything that affects the family's welfare affects them first, and everything in the family's life benefits from their influence. They do the family buying. They see that everybody in the family circle is well-clothed and well-fed. But beyond this, they are the custodian of its values and aspirations for the future. In their hands lies the training of our young people, to whom they pass on the rich heritage of our nation, its love of peace and justice, and its passion for freedom. The women of our country swept Dwight D. Eisenhower into office 4 years ago. They will probably decide the election this time. And they like Ike. And here's somebody else they like, too. Ike's beloved Mamie, whose smile and modesty and easy natural charm make her the ideal First Lady. Let's keep our First Lady in the White House for 4 more years. November 6th, vote for Dwight D. Eisenhower.
The National Citizens for Eisenhower-Nixon have presented this message to all thinking voters, regardless of party affiliation.
This is
Watch CBS News for fast, accurate election night coverage on the CBS Television Network.
The pre-recorded paid political broadcast sponsored by the Democratic National Committee on behalf of President Johnson's candidacy for the office of President. Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States.
My fellow Americans, we have had many hard-fought presidential campaigns, but there has almost always been a broad area of agreement about the basic principles of American government and about the basic goals of the American nation. That is not so this year. This year it is a decision whether we will move ahead building on the solid structure that we have created over a generation, or whether we will tear down this structure and move in a radically different and, I believe, a deeply dangerous direction. I would like to discuss this choice as it affects older Americans and all those who have relatives approaching retirement. Over 30 years, we have shaped a simple philosophy. Those who have given a lifetime of labor to their country, who have fought its wars and built its strength, are entitled to live out their years in happiness and dignity. Our basic instrument has been the Social Security system. This system was born under President Roosevelt. It was preserved and strengthened by President Truman and President Eisenhower and President Kennedy. Sometimes they had different views on different proposals, but neither they nor their opponents ever wanted to abandon the system. Neither they nor their opponents challenged America's duty to strengthen it and improve it. This year, you have such a choice. Our opponent has called for an end to Social Security as we know it. He has advocated a voluntary program. He has said, and I quote him, "People can better buy protection privately than the Social Security law provides for them." A Republican governor, himself a candidate for president, described what this meant when he said a few months ago it would, and I quote him, "be a personal disaster for millions of senior citizens and their families." Now, why is this so? There are many reasons. The clearest is that you can only pay out benefits to older Americans if you receive a steady flow of premiums from working Americans. A voluntary program would drastically reduce this flow. I'm afraid the system would soon be bankrupt. Now, this is not just a single careless statement made by someone in the heat of a campaign. It is a conviction repeated many times. It is backed by a steady record of votes in opposition to almost every measure to help older Americans. Nor is it a matter of party policy. Our opponent was the only Republican in the entire United States Senate to vote against President Eisenhower's plan for medical care. I offer you a different choice. I intend to preserve and strengthen our Social Security system. I intend to make it stronger by keeping benefits up with rising living costs. I intend to add to it by a program of medical care insurance against illness in old age, by a program of loan guarantees so that older Americans can have a decent home. I do not believe that older Americans should be forced to live out their lives in poverty, their tiny savings destroyed by illness, dependent upon their relatives, feeling unwanted by their country. The choice is yours.
their minds and not into their hands.
The speech in which Richard Nixon accepted the Republican nomination for the presidency had many high moments. One of the most talked about was the excerpt you're about to see. Richard Nixon's moving description of the very different lives of two children.
Tonight, therefore, as we make this commitment, let us look into our hearts and let us look down into the faces of our children. Is there anything in the world that should stand in their way? None of the old hatreds mean anything when you look down into the faces of our children. In their faces is our hope, our love, and our courage. Tonight I see the face of a child. He lives in a great city. He's black or he's white. He's Mexican, Italian, Polish. None of that matters. What matters, he's an American child. That child in that great city is more important than any politician's promise. He is America. He is a poet. He's a scientist. He's a great teacher. He's a proud craftsman. He's everything we ever hoped to be and everything we dare to dream to be. He sleeps the sleep of childhood and he dreams the dreams of a child. And yet when he awakens to a living nightmare of poverty, neglect, and despair. He fails in school. He ends up on welfare. For him, the American system is one that feeds his stomach and starves his soul. It breaks his heart. And in the end, it may take his life on some distant battlefield. To millions of children in this rich land, this is their prospect for the future. But this is only part of what I see in America. I see another child tonight. He hears the train go by at night and he dreams of faraway places where he'd like to go. Seems like an impossible dream. But he is helped on his journey through life. A father who had to go to work before he finished the 6th grade sacrificed everything he had so that his sons could go to college. A gentle Quaker mother with a passionate concern for peace quietly wept when he went to war, but she understood why he had to go. A great teacher, a remarkable football coach, an inspirational minister, encouraged him on his way. A courageous wife and loyal children stood by him in victory and also in defeat. And in his chosen profession of politics, first there were scores, and then hundreds, then thousands, and finally millions worked for his success. And tonight, he stands before you, nominated for President of the United States of America.
More than any other man on the American political scene, Richard Nixon is the man for our time. Aware of what is happening to our country, sensitive to the needs of the less fortunate, dedicated to protecting the rights of all, and most of all, with unshakable faith in the ultimate destiny of America.
The Vice President of the United States.
There is a vast group of Americans today, a majority of many, many millions, who want to make this country work and who love this country. They are the nonviolent majority. And they come from all segments of America, black and white, rich and poor, young and old. They want safety, and they want equal rights for everyone. They bear no ill will against other Americans. They want change, but they want it without violence. They don't want it clubbed into people. They don't want it bulldozed through by a handful who shout down all opposition. That handful has occupied center stage lately in American politics. I've seen what they represent, and I do not like it. It is opposed to the true American spirit. I saw it in Minneapolis when George Wallace was interrupted by demonstrations and fist-fighting. I firmly reject Mr. Wallace's point of view, but we must all defend his right to talk without fear or intimidation. I saw it at the Republican Convention in 1964, when Nelson Rockefeller was shouted down by a small, hostile group. And I saw it on the 4th of July when a loud, rude clique tried to drown me out with chants and jeers as I spoke for free speech at Philadelphia's Independence Hall. And we've all seen it in the disruptions of great universities and city streets by a violent few who exploited needed reforms. Now, they claim to represent the spirit of change in America. But I believe that the true wellspring of change is in the great nonviolent majority. I believe they are ready to speak out again. So on their behalf, I challenge those whose minds are so closed they will not listen to any point of view but their own. The great nonviolent majority of Americans believe in the right of the minority to be heard. So why won't the few give the majority the same right? The unique success of the United States is grounded in the fact that this is one country in which a man does not need to riot in order to reach the platform. And when he gets there, he does not need to shout in order to be heard. I know this is true because I have been heard. I've tried to speak for the majority who want orderly change within the democratic process. And I've done so for more than 20 years. And I've helped make things change without violence. I introduced the first fair employment practices in this country. I proposed Medicare, the Job Corps, the Peace Corps, Food for Peace, federal aid to education, and more civil rights legislation than I have time to tell you about. And now, as we look ahead, I have new ideas. Ideas to bring needed change without violence. A Marshall Plan to rebuild our cities. A guaranteed education plan from preschool through college. A plan to spread the burden of military service more fairly. And a plan to stop the dangerous arms race. A program for civil order and civil justice. These are proposals to do jobs that need doing. And if I'm elected president, I will act on them. I will act on them because I believe them to be the desires of the majority of Americans. The majority who believe in their country and love it, who obey its laws, who pay its taxes, who hope and work for better things, for needed change without violence. Now, if you count yourself amongst these Americans, I would like to speak for you.
The preceding pre-recorded political program was paid for by Citizens for Humphrey.
Recently, Richard Nixon participated in a live, unrehearsed question and answer program before a panel of Georgia citizens. The following is an excerpt of that program.
Mr. Nixon, what would you do as president to bring law and order back to America, and what is your definition of law and order?
Well, let me start with the definition first. By law and order, I mean law and order for everybody. And let me lay one thing right on the line at the beginning. I know that it has been suggested that law and order is a code word for racism. I don't buy that at all. Let's understand that as far as law and order is concerned, that black Americans have just as great a stake in law and order as white Americans have. Fear stalks the ghettos as well as it stalks the suburbs. And we have to remember that when we think of organized crime, for example, it preys on the poor. The poor people, for example, they are the victims of the narcotics, and they're the victims of the numbers and all the other things which organized crime engages in. If you're going to have law and order, you must also have, among people who do not have a chance, you've got to have the hope that they can go up. You know, it's very easy to say, well, if we just put enough police in the cities to control some of these things, and if we pay them enough and if we give them enough authority, we'll have law and order. Not over the long haul. Because if you have people that have no hope, they eventually will explode. And if they explode, then you simply have what I would call the warfare, which nobody in America wants. We've got to look at some of the decisions that have been handed down by some of our courts. Let me make my position very clear. I'm a lawyer. I've argued a case before the Supreme Court on 2 occasions.
I respect the Supreme Court as an institution. I respect the men on it. On the other hand, I disagree with some of the decisions. And as I look over the decisions of that court in recent years, I have reached the conclusion, that and other courts, that some of our courts in their decisions, and it's only the decisions I'm criticizing, but some of our courts in their decisions have gone too far in weakening the peace forces as against the criminal forces, and we have to ready that balance in the United States. Now, let me give you an example. Let me give you an example. I was just in Philadelphia the other day. I think we've got to use examples to prove these points. I was in Philadelphia the other day. I found that as a result of one Supreme Court decision that I have criticized, and a decision that will be rectified provided the law of the Congress does see get the constitutional approval that it will need. But looking at that particular decision, I found as a result of that one decision, these three things happened. A cab driver had been brutally murdered. The man who confessed it was set free because of that decision. An elderly man had been brutally murdered and robbed, and the man who confessed it while he was on a spending spree in Las Vegas, he was set free. And then an elderly woman was brutally murdered, and she was robbed and clubbed to death, and the man who was guilty of that crime was set free. Now, I think that when you have a situation where your courts, because of technical factors involved, have gone that far, what we need to recognize is that the balance between the peace forces and the criminal forces has gone too far in this way. We've got to put it back this way, because we've got to remember that the innocent in America deserve protection, as well as those who are charged with crime.
If you believe Richard Nixon should be our next president, please help by contributing to his campaign. Send your contribution to Nixon, Box 100, Washington, D.C. We need your help. We need it now. Send your contribution to Nixon, Box 100, Washington, D.C. This time, give like your whole world depended on it.